Thank you all so much for starting your second day at LightBox here. We all greatly appreciate it. We have, dare I say, a wickedly talented panel of people here today to talk about one of the biggest movies of last year, Wicked. I think that's the perfect place to jump right into it. Although, quick note, we are going to have a fairly generous amount of time for audience questions. So if you have something you would like to ask that we didn't cover today, please keep that in the back of your mind, because you might be able to ask our wonderful panelists here, who I will introduce right now. Starting with the middle here, we have the co-founder of 9B Collective, the first Black-owned concept artist studio ever. With 15 years of experience, he has worked on some of the biggest films in the most recent years, that of course being from the MCU with Black Panther, Captain Marvel, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, as well as Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the first two Star Trek films, and Justice League. In addition to that, he has also done production design for some incredible music videos of some of the biggest artists working today, including Busta Rhymes, Panic at the Disco, and most relevant to today's conversation, of course, Ariana Grande. Please welcome Philip Boutté Jr.
Hi, everybody. Thank you.
And then to my immediate left here, a graduate from Falmouth School of Arts with 41 years of professional experience, 23 of which as a professional concept artist. He has worked on some of the biggest franchises in the world, including Pirates of the Caribbean, Captain America: The First Avenger, Avengers: Age of Ultron, Wonder Woman, The Little Mermaid, Wonka, and much more. Please welcome Darrell Warner. And last but certainly not least, a pioneer in the world of costume design. Following his studies at NYU and North Carolina School of Arts, he has also served as a faculty member at Carnegie Mellon. He is 3/4 of the way to an EGOT, having won an Emmy for another version of The Wizard of Oz, that being the television production of The Wiz. He also worked on he received several Tony nominations and awards for his work on The Color Purple, In the Heights, Death Becomes Her, and a little show you may have heard of called Hamilton. And finally, when it comes to the Oscars, not only did he become the first Black man in history to be nominated for Best Costume Design for his work on Steven Spielberg's West Side Story, he outdid himself, but a few years later, by winning that very award for the film we are talking about today. Please welcome Paul Tazewell. All right, I will start with the toughest question of the day. How are all of you doing?
Awake.
We'd love to hear it. So the title of today's panel, and while we are absolutely going to talk about the costumes that won so many awards for this incredible film, it's called The Transatlantic Journey. Darrell, would you like to start us off by telling us more about what that means literally and figuratively?
Well, I don't know if anybody is familiar with the setup of film in general, but quite often projects start in one location and end up in another. And in this case, Phil and Paul were based here in the US, and the project I think initially was going to end up being filmed here in the US, and for whatever reason, I'm not quite sure, but it then transpired that Paul was then sent to the UK, had to find a completely new crew, as it were, and then that's how my part of the journey began. But in that previous period, there was quite a number of months where Paul and Phil were very much involved with just generating a lot of this. So that's really the story of how the transatlantic journey is to explain the period, that time frame that can quite often happen within film that most people don't have no realization that maybe 2 years before production even kind of starts to kick off, that all this background stuff is going on in some other place.
Fantastic. Paul, would you like to give your perspective on the transatlantic journey?
Sure. When I was engaged to design Wicked, it was originally going to be filmed in Atlanta, and that was probably about 9 months to a year before I actually went over for pre-production. So I had about a year to start in on the design, and I had reached out, I had worked with Phil and 9B on another film project that actually didn't happen, but we were working very extensively, and this was all during the COVID, period of time, so it was all long distance. I live in New York, and Phil and his team were mostly based in LA, and then there are some other artists that were I think outside of
Yeah, a little bit outside, yeah.
But I think that what was beautiful about kind of the inclusiveness of the experience was that we did have an opportunity to develop within the kind of the American vernacular, and then take it over to the UK and expand on what the world might be, and then also take advantage of the excellence and expertise of all the makers and artists that are in place in the UK. So it just felt just even bigger than it could have been if we were just in the US.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, you mentioned 9B, Philip, so that sets you up perfectly. What was your introduction to this vast Oscar-winning production?
I believe Paul reached out, and one of the producers, and kind of told us that what was happening. And like Paul said, we had worked on something before, and we enjoyed that process. So we knew that he had an amount of time that he was able to kind of get out his first ideas, right? So like trying to figure it out. He had a really beautiful presentation he had done to the studio that had all of the different like kind of ideas and like his musings of like anywhere between like feelings, so like paintings, nature, different costume, fashion references, just everything that he was kind of trying to hone in for the different characters and kind of the townspeople and Munchkins and Emerald City. And so that initial kind of reach out was great for us because then we could kind of get into his head. And then Paul's really organized. So he organized the whole like kind of a Dropbox of all these different folders of like specific reference. And it was really easy then to kind of see the overall thought process of his world building. And so once we were brought into that project, we kind of like crewed up, depending on what we knew Paul was gonna need, we found artists that would fit that kind of mold, and then we started.
Fantastic. Well, we can talk about these costumes all day long, but sometimes it's even better to see them in motion. Darrell, I believe we have the first trailer from the first movie.
Or do they have wickedness thrust upon them? You're green.
I am. Welcome, new students, to Shiz University. Miss Elphaba, you can room with Miss Galinda.
Popular. I know about popular. Oh, I saved you some space, by the way.
Do you really think this is fair?
I do not. I was promised a private suite. But thanks for asking.
Please, everyone take your seats. In today's Oz, a real sorcerer who possesses true magic has become all too rare.
Absolutely remarkable.
That was you who made all that happen. How did you do it?
I don't know. I've never known. You, come with me.
Of course.
Not you. You. You're the one the wizard has been waiting for.
Galinda?
Ew! I know. It's my granny's. I'd give it away, but I don't hate anyone that much. Hey! You should join us tonight. And don't tell me you have nothing to wear. Because you could wear this.
Something has changed within me.
She doesn't give a twink what anyone thinks.
Something is not the same.
Of course she does. She just pretends not to.
The wonderful Wizard of Oz summons you to Emerald City. Come with me.
What?
To meet the wizard.
Why couldn't possibly? This is your moment. I'm coming.
The great and terrible.
Something bad is happening in Oz.
The best way to bring folks together is to give them a real good enemy.
You have no real power.
why I need you.
Don't let her get away! This wicked witch.
Don't be afraid.
I'm not afraid. It's the wizard who should be afraid of me.
Such an amazing, beautiful, incredible movie. Question for the audience, and I apologize in advance as I may be aging every single one of us. While I'm sure we have fans of the movie here, do we have any fans of the original Broadway show, Wicked? There we go, all right. Well, it's kind of amazing how long it took to get a Wicked movie because it was such a phenomenon when it first released. Really, the only thing I can compare it to is Hamilton, which you, of course, worked on, Paul, in terms of how it became such this global sensation. I'm curious, for all three of you, what was your connection to Wicked before joining the movie?
Oh gosh, well, I mean, I had seen actually, my husband worked as an assistant on the original Broadway show of Wicked, and that was in 2000, 2001. Well, it was they just had their 20th anniversary, so it would have been 2005, yeah, 2004. And that was, you know, I would hear inside stories of what that was in development, you know, and how they approached the musical. And Susan Hilferty, who's a dear friend, designed the costumes for that. So it was a place of, you know, as a designer, I was very intrigued. You know, I was also a little envious of that kind of expansive design. Then, you know, I went to see it and I fell in love with the story. I mean, I've always loved Steven Schwartz's, sorry about that, Steven Schwartz's music. From the time that I was a child, I fell in love with Godspell. Pippin was my favorite musical ever for a long time, and then to have the opportunity to design Wicked, you know, was a full circle moment. Yeah.
That's tough to follow, but Philip, Darrell, anything to add to that?
I grew up, actually, my background in LA was I was an actor from about 3 until 17. So my formative years were all spent in entertainment. But I grew up with stuff like, you know, Goonies and Neverending Story and Flight of the Navigator, like all of those things. So my imagination has always been pretty strong, and definitely Wizard of Oz was a big part of that. As an adult, I started to get into musicals and stuff, but my wife actually really loves Wicked, like loves it, sings it in the shower. I'm just like, what song is this? And so with the opportunity came, you know, to do it, I was really excited because I knew that it would be something that in our household would be a big deal. And so that's kind of how, like, I was very excited about it.
Great.
And from my perspective, I guess, you know, The Wizard of Oz, certainly in the UK when I was growing up, would be on every Christmas or every holiday. And strangely, because of its generation, it would be immediately turned off. Simply because, you know, my parents' generation, they grew up with it. So we're not watching that, we're going to watch something else. So my curiosity was always piqued. So eventually, you know, I must have been about 8 or 9 when I fully realized what the Wizard of Oz was about and seen the film. And then much later, in terms of Wicked, it was really through my children because they, you know, the show was on in the West End, and I remember, it must have been about 2008, they went up, and it was a Halloween, you know, and they dressed up green, you know, as Elphaba, and actually my daughter, who's very much in sort of stage and dance, she did actually play Elphaba in a, you know, recently on you know, in a dance number on stage. So there's, you know, it's a vein of kind of Americana that's run through our family for, you know, some time.
I was not expecting all of you to have such a personal connection. That's wonderful. Well, Darrell, I believe we have some mood boards from the original Wicked, courtesy of Paul.
Right.
So, Paul, I would love to hear more on what you are looking for in the ideal mood board, not to mention why it's so important for the costume design aspect of a film specifically, or any production.
You know, what we're looking at, I mean, I think this is representative of how I present ideas, you know, how I start to, partly for myself, and then also how I'm going to start to share my point of view with the director and or with producers. So it's a collective of imagery that is organized in a way that speaks to how I see a character or how I see a group of people or community within, you know, that is depicted within the film. I often start with just a more abstract, visceral reaction to the world that feels representative of how I might, you know, kind of expand the story. You know, it's all, you know, especially with, you know, in this process of world building, you know, we're about developing a vocabulary, rules that will govern how, you know, some way to contain, you know, this magical world. You know, it was very important, you know, I realized that it was going to be very important to embrace the overall culture of The Wizard of Oz, which holds The Wizard of Oz as it was written by, you know, originally written by Frank L. Baum, the film of The Wizard of Oz from 1939, The Wiz, all the different productions of The Wiz, Wicked on Broadway. I mean, there, you know, because there's the fan base is very, you know, it's huge. It's expansive, and the entry into the story and how the characters are embraced is varied. And you know, for a film that was going to be representative of 2025, I wanted for it to kind of hold all of those points of view, and in doing that, find those things that resonate in a consistent way throughout, you know, as I experience them. And that's, you know, as a designer, all I can go with, all I can hold on to is how I relate to it, what my emotional connection to the imagery is, and then hope that everybody else will jump on board, and you know that you know the experience will be as magical for them as it is for me.
Fantastic. Well, clearly the 1939 film has been something of an inspiration, as you can probably imagine, as they're both represented on both of these boards. So it seems to be a perfect time to ask. When it comes to Wicked, it is a unique adaptation because it's a movie that is adapting a Broadway show, that is adapting a book, that is adapting another book, all of which is somewhat inspired by the 1939 movie. Darrell and Philip, you specifically have worked on several comic book movies, so I'm sure you know that fans really take their costumes seriously when it comes to adaptations. So whether it's for Wicked specifically or really any project you work on, what is your approach to adapting a beloved material like Wicked?
Is that
for all of you, yeah.
Well, I think it very much comes from, you know, Paul and the designer. Obviously, we do have input in terms of our own ideas, but I think certainly on this project, Paul has such clarity as to really how he wanted for each character to be portrayed and then grow through the you know, the scale of the film. And I guess, you know, as an overall, you know, my job has always been to, you know, I stand on the shoulders of others in many ways because, and you'll see in his presentation, so Phil and his team, you know, they did all the hard work. I came in and, you know, just really kind of, you know, it's a little bit of finesse, you know, because, you know, Paul, I think, you know, being a traditional artist, I don't have the facility to churn out lots of stuff. So my application is very, very succinct in many ways, and because I practice in watercolor, you know, Paul and I had an affinity with that because, you know, I think you do a lot of your initial stuff in watercolor. So, and that just became our language and our norm. Now that is unusual. I have to say this is a very unusual project because of that and because of the way Paul works. It doesn't, you know, and that's an exception in you know, the case of Wicked for sure.
I mean, I was just going to, Darrell is downplaying his, his input and importance, of course, in his modesty. I think that, it was, which is why, this overall process, these two films resonate so deeply and I think that it's for so many people. Is that the work is so intense. I mean, everyone that was involved was intent on making this the most beautiful thing that it could be, and I think that there was, I take it back to the analog nature of how we created it, which was, that it's pencil to paper. It's pencil to, the idea that is researched in an old school way, and then it's the idea then realizing itself and being handed over to other people who are also thinking and bringing life to these ideas in a similar fashion. I mean, there's a like-mindedness in how we were creating it. Whether it was, that the illustration in the end was a digital illustration, there's still some connection to it where there's stylus to screen, or there's pencil to paper, that and that informed why I wanted for Darrell to work on this, because it was he speaks the same language as I do in the development of design. That is it's a very important part of my process, where, and as you can see represented in these sketches, I'm figuring out, in the amount of time that it takes to draw out and perfect silhouette, I'm figuring out what is this fabrication going to be? What is the color? How is it going to relate to one character or another? How am I creating this world? And my pencil is telling me, and answering those questions. And then to see, Darrell's care, as he's, figuring things out as well, to have the opportunity to work with Phil and his team to see what, to take what I've done as a drawing and then realize it as an image that I can then react to and decide if that's the direction to go or not. And in that process, I'm also offering it up to John M. Chu, our director, to get his feedback. And it's, and we all know that it's going to be easier for someone who is not in the, doesn't do what we do, whether it's understanding clothing or understanding period, or just that side of costume design. It's important to give them as close as possible, an idea of what it's going to end up being, so that they can react to it, and you can edit those things that just are not going to work.
I want to say something to both of their credits too. Something that I learned is a trick in this when you're talking about, especially like big fan bases, or the tricky ones where people are really focused on, like getting it right? Like this is something I've been waiting for, and they both do it, which is, it's a weird thing. But you focus on that some, but not initially. The initial part, you find the job, which is what's the job, and then what's the problem-solving element, and then you start to world build around an initial focus. So Paul starts building things and starts curating things. Darrell does the same thing when he's drawing and sketching, and so it's more about focusing on that and then trying to do the best work possible, but then you find the elements that people will gravitate towards later. Because I think if you put it up front, it can be kind of crushing, because you're just like, then you start being like, I want to do a good job, right? But the job in itself kind of dictates you start with your creative process and then push it forward. So it all comes later, but I think everybody in hindsight sometimes thinks it comes up first, and it's like the last thing you're thinking about. First you're thinking about like, okay, what is this? Because it can get really overwhelming. You're like, I'm designing Wicked, and then you can just, like you're just like, what am I doing? So I think it's good to do it that way.
Right. And I think we should point out, Paul, those were all your sketches.
Those are my pencil sketches, yeah. So those I was offering up to 9B, to Phil and 9B, and then also Darrell as well.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. Well, speaking of 9B, I think this is the perfect time to ask Philip. So obviously concept art is pivotal to the filmmaking process. When you and 9B sign on to do a project, especially one that's as huge and ambitious as Wicked, I'd love to hear more what your process looks like at the start and just how many people are working on one character, let alone multiple characters.
I think initially, we had about 6 artists or so working all together total. And our process is really to integrate and to fold in how our designer is working. So if we're working for a costume designer like Paul, we really want to know how does he work, what works best for him, and we're trying to kind of facilitate and build something around that process, especially because someone like Paul gets very busy, right? So he'll be designing multiple things at a time. And so it's really important. It's true, but it's important to learn what he's doing and what his sensibilities are, so that making sure that you can kind of bring things to the table that he's looking for, and then also kind of like facilitate in ideas around something where it's like he says, I'm thinking this, right? So you make sure you do that one first, and then it's like, here's 2 or 3 other options. And sometimes we go in that way, and sometimes we go this way. But our initial thing was that, and then Paul kind of split it up based on character. And said, okay, you're going to do Elphaba, you're going to do Glinda, and then Munchkins and stuff. And then we had strengths and weaknesses on both ends, where we kind of balanced it, where we gave artists, their best way so that they be set up to succeed. And I think it worked really well, at least in terms of us being able to get out a lot of the initial ideas. And that's what you're seeing here, are just sketches and things kind of facilitating and kind of going through between Jace and Jason here, who loves to kind of sketch and ideate and then come up with things. So you're seeing here, this was a good example because one of Paul's initial kind of musings for Munchkin Land was ruching, or sorry, is that smocking? Smocking. Yeah. Smocking technique, which you're seeing there. And so that was something that was pivotal to making Munchkin Land look like Munchkin Land, right? It's not Emerald City, it's not this. So one kind of, technical technique, and then building everything around that.
Right. I mean, this was, the sketches that Jace did for these. I mean, I was gravitating to, because there are different lands of Oz. There's Munchkin Land, there's the Uplanders, and then there's Kiamako. And each of those lands have specific attributes. There are things that define that land, or it needed to be that there was something that was defining those people of that land, and the differences of those people of that land, which is a running theme in the story of when you're focusing on a woman who is green and being vilified for the color of her skin. It's about difference and how those things are different. But then within that the overall world of Oz, there needed to be a consistency in what that they all exist in the same time and space. And so there are references that trip over from one to the other. That world of smocking became specific to the world of Munchkin Land because it was also represented in lots of folkware that I was researching, and in the Victorian era, there were that kind of detail then became, and really detail throughout, and specificity of detail has become the one of the overriding attributes of the design of Wicked. I mean, it's because I am so in love with costume making and all of the different kinds of techniques.
No,
I mean,
You?
I work to maximize that so that it starts to define. And also because there is great care in the detail, it gave a reality to this fantasy world where you can really believe in it. And that part was very consistent throughout.
Fantastic. Well, you mentioned the diversity of the cast. I think that's another thing that Wicked absolutely needs to be applauded on, is how diverse the movie is both on screen and off screen. It really did an incredible job in that respect. Another thing that stands out about all this incredible art is that it is not just close to what we see in the final product, it is identical. It's really incredible how close it is. And I'm curious, when all of you joined the project, I know Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande were the first, if not among the first, to be cast. When you eventually, if you were working on the project before they were cast, how does that process change when you have an actor? Is it as simple as just putting their face on the art you already have done, or does it kind of become a whole different process?
Well, it's hugely additive. When I was working, because as a designer, you work, a bit in a vacuum. For a period of time, you're working alone. You're working in your own space, and you're trying to figure it out. And for me, I'm trying to find myself in the story. It's like, how can I identify with these characters? What is going to make, what's going to create my connection to them? Somewhere in there, I realized, as I was listening over to the soundtrack over and over again, I was like, oh, right. She's not singing about a person that's green. She's singing about a person that's a person of color. And then I look in the mirror, it's like, yeah, well, there it is. This is my story. And really for the probably the last 25 years, I've worked to find, okay, so what is my own personal connection, and what do I, what do I gain from pursuing this? And for Wicked, it became obvious, and then as we continued to work, I was starting to think about Cynthia Erivo in this role, independent of what was going on, because also as a costume designer, I don't know, I don't imagine that I have any kind of connection to what that casting process is in the studios and that kind of thing. But I had worked with Cynthia on Harriet, so I had her as an image that I was following for myself. Then in conversation with John, I was, hearing that they were getting ready to see Ariana Grande, they were getting ready to see Cynthia Erivo, and I was like, yeah, if that ever manifests, that is absolutely fantastic, because it would speak so directly to where we are and what this, the overall story is saying, and it became necessary for me. It was like, this is necessary, and also it validated everything that I was feeling about the story and how I wanted to tell the story. And then to have that realized that she was cast, I was, it was like full on, manifestation. Yeah. But it then allowed for me to take her character to that next place, which is where she ends up when she go, for good. It's and I'm always, as a costume designer for all the years that I've been doing this, is figuring out what is the emotional arc. What is, for me, what's a privilege is to be able to design musicals that have music that transports you, that carries your emotion, to have dance that is, that becomes the only way to express physically what's going on inside of you. And seeing that represented, I bring my element, my language of clothing into that storytelling, and hope to help to transcend that in the storytelling and be additive in the storytelling. So it's always about how can we continue to build, and so I don't know where I was going with this, but
I think you covered it. Well, I mean, it's a wonderful example that storytelling and filmmaking is not just in the writing or directing phase.
Yeah.
It's throughout all departments, and
Yeah.
I think that's something just about everyone here can relate to. Well, that seems like a perfect opportunity to really delve into the specifics of each character. I believe we have, yep, there she is. So Glinda as a character specifically, I think everyone knows that she's a character that's all about excess, especially at the start of the story. So for that reason, she has what feels like a billion costumes, but maybe the bubble dress is maybe a prime example of maybe her more iconic look, especially how it pays homage to the original movie. Tell us a little more about designing Glinda. Darrell, you want to start with that one?
I mean, one of there was what is interesting about this series of process sketches is that first image that you saw was actually Phil's sketch with 9B. So that was very early on, and that was taken from because I was looking at a lot of modern fashion as well, because that was fueling a point of view, seeing this story through the lens of 2000, whenever we were, 2021. And also I was very drawn to how sculpture was being used or expressed in clothing, in fashion, or how it's continued to be raised. I mean, and also fabrication, interesting fabrication. So this was Phil's expression of what I was offering up, as an idea. And that then continued, and for all of those earlier sketches, it was, this was a starting place that then, as I was, if you keep going, what ended up happening through conversation with Ariana Grande is she wanted to have more exposure in her arms and shoulders. And that was just her own personal, interest. I mean, and so I wanted to figure out how can I incorporate this in and still hold on to similar qualities. And there were some other silhouettes that John Chu and I were looking at as well in the mix. And then I was refining this idea of the Fibonacci spiral and figuring out how to incorporate that into all of the different elements of Oz. So that sketch, the one to the left, is mine figuring out, how will I use the imagery and how can I change this, and also acknowledge what Ariana Grande wants for, just to be seen as Glinda in the first time that we see her. As well, understanding this is, it's inspired by the Billy Burke Glinda that we all know from the Wizard of Oz film. And I knew that I wanted to interpret it as pink, but I wanted to be a different view, a more modern view, and an original view of who Glinda might be. So it becomes an amalgam of many different ideas. Actually, at this point, when you see Darrell's sketch, which is Darrell's then interpretation of what I did, on the hem, there are all of these dimensional bubbles that are swirling around her, which we played with as well, where, I thought, oh, well, maybe we'll have cast, the clear orbs that are part of the dress. And just really figuring out the literalness of what the design is versus just what could be suggestive. And that then evolved into a pattern that was foiled onto the hem, and it became part of a pattern as well.
Wow, seeing that evolution to the final product is so cool.
It's one of my favorite ones just because it really highlights too how the concept is the initial stage, but then it changes. And I remember Paul was on set and he sent me a photo of what it turned out to be, and I hadn't seen it because at this point now it's in London, and I was like, well, that turned out great. It's amazing.
Yeah, well, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. Seeing how accurate the original design is to the final product is incredible. I'm sure we'll get to Elphaba in a moment, but you mentioned modernizing the designs for this, and the thing that makes Wicked so distinct, both in the movie and the Broadway show, is how it's, it's Wizard of Oz, so it is fantastical, it is a fantasy, but it also is a bit more modern. You wouldn't typically expect a more modern college in the world of the Wizard of Oz, maybe from 1939. How did each of you find that balance, whether it was illustrating the costumes or designing them?
I'm kind of conscious that we need to get through stuff because we're quite, we've got a time scale. So, for me, in terms of, I didn't really have too much to do with the shiz side. Although I did do Ariana's, the same way that Phil operates with his artists, Paul came to me and said, okay, here's a list of, we need to start working on these characters. So yes, I had Glinda and I have Fiero. And because Paul has multiple ideas on each, you just systematically work through those ideas and present them. And, some get traction, others don't. But, again, it's after Paul's presented to John. And he'll come back and just say, okay, well, this is, John's not interested in this, or can we develop this a little bit further? So from my basis, everything is based in drawing. and I spent a lot of time talking to Paul about it, in terms of asking questions and sort of relaying, making sure that, the physique, the costume is correct with the physique, and the kind of the waistline is correct. But again, Paul, is, he's so professional and just knows exactly where every small aspect should be of that costume, that it makes my job a delight, because it's like, okay, I'm just going to paint it. So it's very straightforward, and again, I can't stipify how unique that is in terms of the collaboration we have. It's very, very, very rare in my experience.
Philip, we saw from your designs earlier that you worked extensively on Elphaba, who, as I'm sure everyone can imagine, is the polar opposite of Glinda in many ways. What can you talk about in designing that character? One of the most iconic characters, not just in Wicked, but really of all time, going back to the 1939 film.
I'd say, I think the initial references that Paul gave us for Elphaba, he had a very specific silhouette in mind, and so it was largely, Victorian at first. And what Paul did, which was great, is that there's a design trick where you basically try to find something classic, right? So something classic and something clean, that when you do the first read, you can read what it is, right? But second read is all the details that make it what it is. And so it's very similar to a concept art trick that we do called, basically like a silhouette drawing. So we're kind of figuring out the overall outside shape and then filling in the details. So he was very specific and very purposeful of looking at those details, like, a leg of mutton sleeves and things like that. But then his instrumentation into the interior of what her costume was, like, that was just otherworldly. And the way that he was looking at stuff, and he was looking at nature and looking at swirls and all kinds of different things, and fabric techniques that would accomplish that, and figuring out like places where you could see like green and then it goes to black, and like it just was definitely a costume designer masterclass in terms of technicality there. But if you look at those shapes, her shapes are very broad, and they're meant to evoke a specific emotion when you look at her at first, whether she's closed off, whether she's hiding, and then if you look at the arc of her costumes throughout the entire thing and the way he did them, you can see a broadness from the first time you see her to the end, and how she gets more confident. And that's something that you can see too, and that's based on what he reveals, what he covers, how he makes her feel, where her glasses are, the way, like, really look at those details and then look at them over the course.
Yeah, I mean, you can see here in this image to the left that this is the first time that we ever see Elphaba, and then to the far right, that's her Shiz uniform, the classic Shiz uniform, which was setting up this idea of restriction and armor, really. But then it's done in a Shiz stripe, that a custom Shiz stripe that was part of her own color palette. I mean, the striping as well. I mean, we'll hopefully be able to get to this, but every element that exists in the world of Oz for this Wicked was imagined. It was all bespoke. All the buttons were bespoke. If you zoom in closely, you can see how each of those buttons, it was a cast Shiz button. And then the same for Emerald City and all of the military that was there. This is, these were ideas of dresses. We actually didn't do any of these dresses. And we did one. We did the one all the way to the right. That was originally going to be her Ozdust dress, and we had two ideas. I think that there's another sketch that Darrell did. It's coming up. Again, in creating this. It's hard to look back. It's not difficult. I love looking back on it, but there is so much lifetime that it took to get all of this that was squashed into a year and a half, and so many hands that went into developing the ideas, and where it would. I would have a germ of an idea, and then it would take off, and then I was trying to navigate all those ideas at the same time, just because of how we needed to, because we were filming both films at the same time, and so we were creating the world, which was, it was ideal, because we were creating the overall arc of this story all at the same time. But we were also scheduled to film, 1 or 2 scenes from Wicked Part 1, and then the rest of the week we were doing, Wicked for Good. It was a little, kind of crazy making just to keep up with the schedule, but it also made for a really creative experience.
I think also factor into that Paul's dealing with all these characters, and then cutters, seamstresses, embroiderers, weavers. It's I'm not sure how many people are on that final.
We had a full-time staff of makers that was about 70, but we would go up to 130, probably 150 if you include all the outside makers that were involved. But when you think about a scene that was like Emerald City, and then the Wizamania scene in Emerald City, all that was being shot at the same, within the same number of weeks, or 2 to 2.5, 3 weeks. So they all had a deadline of that same period of time. So we've got 400 background, and then another 50 that are a part of this, kind of specialty scene, theatrical scene, and then all of the uniforms of, the Emerald City Guard. It's just, it was amazing and overwhelming and just perfect for me, because that's just my joy space.
I'd just like to say that's mental compression for me. It's like,
Well, you mentioned Emerald City. We are running a little bit short on time. I'm going to make sure we get to questions. But that I believe
that's
is
incredible.
Some of these, these were things that actually didn't make it on script. We did shoot them. Some of the we had to go through a process. Jason was talking about, Jason did a lot of Munchkin Land. He did some young Alphaba. He also helped to figure out Shiz and the uniform and the sportswear, because, again, we've got a college, and of course they have some kind of football, soccer team, or they've, and this ended up being the roller. I think that we probably had an Aussie name for it, but there was the rollerbladers or the roller skaters that would run through. They were helmeted and based on more of a Victorian football player. And then these are the animals. So I was just, in order to keep the world of Oz consistent, because you have animals that are walking through in a natural way as animals, but also dressed in some way that lended itself to the overall world of Oz, I was designing what their costumes might be. We had professors that were on staff at Shiz that were animals, so they needed to be designed. The staff this is probably for them. This is for Good. So in Glinda's boudoir and in the palace, there were also animals that were working there as well. To the left, that was Ozdust.
Quick note here, the reason why you can't see Fiero's face here is that you designed it with a different actor in mind for
I think we should also point out, that quite often when we start out on these films, we have no casting, and in the case of Fiero, we had nobody been recommended, and we decided that we would base it on one particular actor, and obviously for legal reasons, we can't show who that actor is.
We're just going to always say if it's covered, it's Pablo Pascal.
He's Blue Bubble. But, we have to start the process. We kind of had to get on, and Paul had, he'd done loads of drawings. Well, you saw those drawings earlier, Fiero. But again, you see here, there are notable sort of little Easter eggs that I'm not going to point out, but if you look very closely, you'll see possibly where that character's heading. But there's a bit of smocking. There's all manner of things going on. And again, the same here. Paul had very much, that patterning in terms of where that background of Winky County.
So
again, creating that world, world and that palette of pattern, if you like. I'm just going to work through these. So again, just detailing.
All the school patches, and creating some kind of relationship between what what we have a real-time connection to, and then how it gets translated into the world of Oz.
Fits the character perfectly as well. Again, it's like a regal princely outfit, but it is a bit more modern.
Yeah.
Well, all right, I want to jump right into the Emerald City section because that, I understand, was a bit of a beast to get done. Well, first of all, it's an amazingly elaborate sequence because you're dealing with so many different costumes. I would love to hear an estimate of how many costumes were involved with that whole sequence, as well as, I'd love to hear more about the challenges of getting that massive Wizomania sequence done.
Yeah, I mean, it was, it was pushed to the end. We also had, and there were a number of different elements. We had the world of Wizomania, and within Wizomania, they wanted to do some cameo appearances. It was a cameo appearance of Idina Menzel and Kristen Chenoweth. And so then that kind of amps up every, okay, so we're going to have, the stars of the original Wicked being represented somewhere within this. You can't just do a throwaway costume. None of these costumes were, it wasn't just a bunch of rental costumes that you could pull together. I mean, everything needed to be bespoke because it needed to look like it was Ozian. Their costumes on either side, right and left, it was inspired by what Nathan was doing, and we haven't really talked about how the production design and Nathan, his world building, how we were continually checking in with each other and referencing each other's sensibility and point of view as we were creating this world, because it needed to, those people that were designing the clothing of Oz were also the architects of the buildings of Oz as well. So there had to be some carryover from one to the other. The presentation of Wizomania, Nathan's research or inspiration was it was like leaves of a pop-up book, which is suggested by the original pop-up book that Elphaba is playing with at the beginning of the film. So then to make that more sophisticated and more of a theatrical presentation, even within the world of a very theatrical community, which was Emerald City, was the challenge. And then, I think that we made those dresses, those costumes in like a week and a half or something. It was something that was really ridiculous.
That was the point where Paul was in his office.
And I'm sure that I had the pencil was in one hand.
It was, yeah.
I don't even want to know the number of costumes at that point then if you did all that in a week. Well, before we open it up to Q&A questions, one more question I want to ask. We are now less than a month away from the second half of this wonderful journey, Wicked for Good. I think they're excited about it. So I love that image as well with the, but with this second half, with Wicked for Good, this is not a big spoiler, it's in the trailer and everything, but we are getting closer and closer to we are getting closer to the original Wizard of Oz story. What can you tell us about closing the gap a little bit between Wicked and the Wizard of Oz tale that we all know and love?
It's necessary to pull the audience in, to not, and all the way through, but, it was really important for me to acknowledge everybody's connection to this culture, to the Wizard of Oz, the story of the Wizard of Oz, and therefore Wicked. I wanted for the four friends, and John M. Chu, also, that was his ask, we needed to recognize who that iconic team was when we see them from a distance, because we see them walking towards that iconic moment of walking down the yellow brick road and moving towards Emerald City, because that's the payoff really, so when you see them lying together, you want to know that there is a Dorothy, there's a Tin Man, there's a Scarecrow, and there's a Lion, that somehow magically they've come, their paths have crossed and they've come together, and then now they're making their way down the yellow brick road. And we didn't, I mean, legally, we didn't have access to those, to try and recreate what they did in the 1939 film. Also, design-wise, as a designer, I didn't want to just duplicate what that was. But we did have the access to the original Wizard of Oz book that Frank L. Baum wrote and the illustrations that were in that. So we went, that was our inspiration. That was my direct inspiration. And to recreate the idea of those in our fantasy figures with the Scarecrow and the Tin Man. And then there's also, for those of you who know Wicked, you know what happens. So, and for those of you who don't, then you can be magically surprised.
You definitely don't want to spoil what happens, for sure.
But I was using the silhouettes from the original Wizard of Oz book. Those illustrations are the silhouettes that I was recreating in the costumes that we ended up with for those two figures. And then there's Dorothy. With Dorothy, in the books, she is in, an odd pinafore dress that, is much younger looking. But it was important because of Gregory Maguire's novel. His send-up or his take is in reaction to the Wizard of Oz film. So that was Judy Garland as Dorothy, that image that I was trying to nod to, but then I also wanted for it to be a turn-of-the-century silhouette, which was reflective of the Wizard of Oz book, it was originally written at the turn of the century. So I was choosing a silhouette that was more turn of the century than I was a 1939 little girl on a farm.
Great. Phil, Darrell, anything to add?
One thing I should probably, not so much about Wicked for Good, but just looking at these images, but it's that attention to detail, but also there's metaphors within the costumes. So like the wizard has the cravat, that's it's symbolizing, the hurricane or the whirlwind. And the same with, Nessa Rose's shoes. If anybody's seen those up close, it's referring to that tornado. So there's lots of little subtleties that Paul really, really honed in on that, was really, really important to the storytelling that, had a bigger overture that reflected on the original Wizard of Oz, which was, just really, 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 very clever designing in my mind. So.
I was going to say, yeah, for us, the DNA came for that. That definitely came later. So we were just like broad strokes, and then they all honed in and then really found that later. And then with Paul working directly also too with the production designer Nathan, they had this like really great back and forth where they started finding all these like really cool things to geek out about, and then the designs just took on a life of their own. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, we are going to jump into the Q&A in just a second, but before then, Darrell, I believe you had one last surprise.
So because there were so many people involved in the artistic journey of this film, we'd like to invite those artists who were involved onto stage now, just to have...
Come on up.
And I just wanted to add, I, as a designer and, as a HOD of the costume department, I want nothing more than to give over all of the accolades to everyone who helped me to create this world, because I could never have done it alone. And everyone brought their very best A game to the process, which was, it's so gratifying to work with these exceptional artists, and to make my work more than it could possibly be.
Now, I might add, obviously, not everybody's here, because I think others people are on panels and so on, but there's a couple of guys from the UK side who were able to make it over. So there were 6, 7, 8, 9, I think there were 10 of us in the end, as artists involved, just primarily in more or less costume. Jared is our lone art department person, but it's great because, in incorporating some of his images, you see the language that, we all subscribe to. So, anyway, there we go.
Oh yeah,
you guys.
you're welcome to stay on
Yeah.
stay on stage for the Q&A as well. So the way that we'll do this is you can just raise your hand really high, and then we will have a runner come to you with a microphone, and we'll just go from there. All right, let's start with you on the end right here.
Well, probably about 15 minutes.
15 minutes.
If there are any questions that are, unfortunately, I have got to go and catch a flight back to New York. But if there are any questions that are specific to costumes, that would be great, or to costume design, and then I'll give it over to everybody else.
Yeah.
Keep him cool, guys. He's got to go to LAX, and you know what that's like.
It's the worst, yeah. All right, I think I pointed you out on the end right there.
This is live if you want to step up.
Oh, perfect. We do have mine. I thought we had a runner. There's the runner.
Okay, hi, sorry. Paul, I wanted to know if there were any ideas that you had for any of the characters that you really loved and you were really married to that did not make it into the film, that you are like heartbroken you didn't get to realize in three-dimensional fabric.
Thank you for that question.
Thanks, Chad.
Oh gosh, I'm sure that there are many. Just trying to. I think that there was, and for those of you who have an opportunity to experience this, it's an amazing experience to spend enough time with a story, with pulling together imagery that helps to define a world, and then it all just comes flooding out, and there's somebody to catch it. And that was what my experience was. So to answer your question, I'm sure that there was something that I really thought was a great idea. There was another great idea that was coming out, an idea that ended up being great, that we made it, more than it could possibly be, because there was somebody to help to, craft that into something that was really beautiful. I don't remember that there was something that I held, and it goes against anymore how I design, where I don't clutch to an idea because it becomes limiting. It stops the process. So I will come up with at least 3 ideas or more to offer a director and to offer actors, because there was a lot of input from actors as well. And each of those ideas I have chosen. I have chosen to offer those up. So any of them are possible, but it might define the direction that we go. If one is chosen, or when one is chosen, then it will define the direction that we will go. So that keeps me safe, and also knowing that it still is in keeping with how I'm seeing the world.
I think we have 1 or 2 quick ones for Paul specifically. Let's start with, you're right there. Go ahead.
Come up to the microphone, guys, if you want a question.
Yeah, if you want to land with the microphone, please do.
The panel, first of all, was super, super inspiring. Like, the costume design of this movie is just breathtaking. It was really inspiring to see, like, the details of the bubble dress, but I was wondering if you could elaborate in any other costume, the way that you elaborated with that one, just a little bit.
I would say that the other that if you look at the Emerald City dress for Elphaba, that was one that I was very proud of because of the technique that we were able to realize in creating that undulating pattern. All of that is micro-pleated chiffon, and the reason that I chose chiffon was because we didn't get a chance to really talk about this, but it's also about the function and engineering of costumes. That's what I bring to this experience. Because I've done so many musicals, I understand how clothing moves on a body. And I made the choice of making this out of chiffon because I knew that it was going to stay soft and light, and that I wanted for the dress to become a part of Elphaba and to move along with her if she was spinning around. And also, the choice of what the cape was going to be made of, which was a silk velvet that was devorate, or it was patterned by, it's an acid burn pattern that creates that bark-like pattern. Anyway, when she spins around and throws the cape back around her, and you see how it catches the air, that was very intentional. I knew that was the one fabric that would carry weight and be majestic, and then also respond to her movement. But that's just with that I knew that because of the experience of working with a lot of fabric, and that's also one of the joys that I have in the process of costume making.
Thank you.
Well, Paul, I know you need to catch a flight pretty soon, unfortunately, but I'm looking for, can we also give a big round of applause to not only our entire panel here, but also to Heather Sorensen from LightBox, who put all of this together. You did an incredible job. I want to ask, I see her right there. So Paul, I know you need to catch a flight. So we have a little bit more time to ask Darrell follow-up questions. So yeah, if you guys want to stand up, make it more official. But yeah, we'll take our next question.
Yeah, I know Paul was really meticulous in giving you guys sketches and reference images and stuff. I was wondering if you guys had the ability to, was he open to taking your own ideas? Did you guys bring new things to the table that ended up moving forward, or?
So the one of the key strengths and greatest things about Paul was he was open to all of it. And sometimes people can get really weird about those processes, right? Paul welcomes them. So he actually amplified all of us to give input, which actually made all of us work a lot harder and made sure that we felt protected and also a part of the process with him. He would give us direction, but he would also really kind of take in the conceptual side. And there are several designs in there from all of us where he would have an initial idea, something came up, and it would kind of shift it a bit, and he would kind of really embrace it. It's one of his favorite parts of the process, is that technical kind of design ideation process. So the best way to describe it is, yes, he was very open to it, and then he amplified it and shot it up. It was great.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just add to that as well. It's simply, like most really great costume designers, they give you enough rope to go and hang yourself at times. So. But that's a great way of working, because what happens is they tend to harvest what they really, really like that you're giving. And because you're in a happy space, of course you want to be, you want to please your designers, so you're giving them much more. So, it's a win-win scenario for everybody in that aspect.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi. Oh, sorry. My question is, when you guys are designing the initial sketches, do you guys keep in mind what materials you're going to be working with potentially and the cost of it, just so you guys don't go overboard with your designs and have to go back and forth with the director?
Technically, yes. Blackly, no. No, technically, yes. It's a mix of both. I think that there's an ideation in terms of Paul's thinking about budget and stuff too, right? But at the same time, there's a part of it where you don't think about it because you need to kind of shoot for the stars and then kind of ideate and kind of create as you go down. But sometimes we have fabric, so there'll be he was talking about the chiffon. He knew he wanted to use that, so we had samples of it already, right? Then there's other things that kind of come along where it's okay, here's the technical aspect of it. Maybe someone did a sketch of something and it was really cool, and then it's okay, how do we make that? How do we do it? So some comes after, some comes up front, but it's kind of this weaving. There's not a direct answer for it. It's both.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm just going to add something. So I'm just going to hand you to Caroline here, because what's interesting is Caroline has a fashion background. So Caroline particularly brought on to deal with certain aspects of kind of, not fabrication, but design aspects within those costumes. So specifically the shiz stripe. So you can take it away.
Oh yeah, so I worked in clothing production for 20 years before I worked in costume for film. So I've got quite a broad knowledge for the shiz uniforms for not the main characters, but for the whole hundreds of other side actors. It had to be printed, and there was pleating for the kilts and things like that. There was shrinkage in the fabric when it was printed and then washed. So I had to try and account for all of that, and we did probably hundreds of swatches of different variations on the colour to just get it just right, so that in natural light under studio lighting it looked just as Paul wanted it. And also the shiz dancers I had quite a lot of autonomy over churning out ideas for that, and the way that the shid stripe goes down and then goes chaotic at the bottom, that didn't come from me, that came from our colleagues over in the US. So props to whoever, was that Gina or was that you?
No, I think it's probably Gina, wasn't it? It's not,
But I kind of took that idea and took it into the embellishment on some of the some of the dancers' costumes for the nightclub scene as well, and that came from me, and I hoped Paul would like it, and he did. So that was
also,
really nice.
I think from a technical point of view, you also have to remember, so with Caroline's experience, the yardage involved with that shiz stripe for the uniforms, I'm not sure how many hundreds of meters had to be ordered, but it had to be correct, because
I had
otherwise
sleepless nights over that.
So that was, it's a very in areas, it's incredibly disciplined, incredibly technical, and then to knowing that that's what Paul's aiming for at every aspect of every single costume. So.
And we all wanted it to be perfect for him because he's such a lovely person. We wanted to do our best, didn't we, to get it just.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you.
We are running a little bit short on time, so I think we have time for about 2-3 more questions.
Okay.
Overall.
Hi. First of all, love everybody's work. As a musical theater kid and a resident Pink lifestyler, I just want to thank everybody who worked on the team for making Galinda's wardrobe all pink for most of it. Because in the musical, she only wears pink for Popular and the Ozdeath scene. So was there a specific decision on how pink became Galinda's color for the movie overall?
I think it was settled on pretty early, but it was based on the original Oz film, The Wizard of Oz.
The Billy Bird.
So that was the kind of our the lead, and Paul wanted to really pay homage to that, and it was just a natural color choice, and and pink and green, it's kind of opposite ends of the spectrum. Just they complement each other, so it just made perfect sense. So, and it was as simple as that. And within those, those pinks that we had a little bit of peach, veering towards the the oranges and so on. But it was always going to be. She was always going to be in that soft pink.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello. I was wondering what the most challenging part about adapting such a classic novel into source material was for you guys, because there's also so many iterations of this kind of similar story. What obstacles did you guys face in creating the designs for the film?
Go on, Jason.
This is working. I would say actually Paul from the get-go was great, and also too, I can't stress the departments working together and pulling in the same direction. And I think right off the bat, everybody was thinking world building. I know when Paul and I first sat down, we had worked together in the past on another project, and he said, Jason, what do you want to do? And I was like, well, I want to do the main characters, but I think, Paul, I'm better served helping you with all the different elements so we can resolve them. So every time you see one of these sketches or one of these concepts, know behind that sketch there's probably different iterations.
Yeah.
There's different shades of pink. There's different fabric swatches. This is going to work. So we're really the hammer to really experiment on. And we're kind of, we kind of drop the grenades and then let everybody figure out the yardage and the costs and everything. We just kind of pull the pin and throw it, and then we move on. Hopefully that.
We literally throw it out there and say, we want this, figure it out.
Yeah. But yes, to your answer, Paul and Nathan really, got their books, their PDFs, their reference. It was very well thought through.
They had a whole language going on that we could just tap into. Really, that was the joy.
Okay. Alrighty, thank you so much. That was a great presentation.
Thank you.
I know I said 2 to 3 more questions. You two have been waiting so patiently that we'll just do everyone in the line there real quick. So go right ahead.
I was wondering, in such a colorful world and costumes of patterns and stripes, how did you work with the production, the art direction and set building, and making sure everything wouldn't clash in the final film?
That's a good question. You want to
Yeah, well, I worked in the art department in the UK with Nathan Crowley, so I was kind of on Emerald City for about a year designing that. And actually, some of the sketches that we saw, I remember seeing those, and it was very important that we designed the environments to complement the actors and the costume, because you don't want the colors clashing or the shapes are too busy in the background. So we had a lot of little cutouts of your lovely drawings like in the 3D world, just trying to see where they would be in space. And some of the images you saw in the presentation, we also had to open up the sets to make them much larger than they would normally be, so allow people to dance and to move and have all those hundreds of extras moving between the scenes. So all of that was really testament to Nathan Crowley and Paul's working together. You know, they just really were on the same page the whole way through.
I'm just going to add, so this will amuse you. So in that whole Wizardmania scene where Adina and Crystal disappear underground, I don't know if you've seen the film, you recall it, but they disappear on the stage and come up again. So that was a trap door. So we had to design those costumes so they would fit perfectly through that trap door as it went down, so they wouldn't catch the side, you know, because it was just shot in one sequence. So there, you know, again, there's testament to Paul's technicality, you know, and talking to Nathan, knowing what, I mean, I had the measurements, literally, of what that space was that they had to descend through to work those costumes. I mean, you know, so that attention to detail in itself is quite alarming, you know.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi. So you touched a little bit on the animals and the costuming and things like that for the animals, which was sort of, it seemed to me, I hadn't seen anything else where it had done literal animals instead of like a costumed human that looked like the animal. So it was kind of, it seemed to me that it was sort of like an interesting, fun playground for you guys to kind of play in, to do something very different than any of the source material before. So I was wondering if you could just kind of talk about how that sort of worked, deciding how to do those subtleties of how those costumes changed and started to have them become less and less human and more animal-like, because that's how that's kind of shown throughout it. And that mic is being handed to someone very specifically. So
I don't, did you do any animals or not?
So early on, we did some tests.
Okay.
And because we weren't sure, we actually did a lot of tests for that, for Munchkinland. I have hard drives of like, how do we want to approach this problem? Are they, you know, bipedal but animals? How do they dress? Are they, you know, just walking it? So we did a lot of tests. I know there was early on a creature designer that they brought on, and I'd played with some stuff, but what we did was very minimal. We had so much to focus on. I'm so jealous of the people that got to stay on for the entire year, because man, it looked like a blast. But then it looks like most of that was then resolved later on. But the same thing with, like I said, the how we want to deal with things. And obviously, a lot of that stuff we don't show because, you know, it's not what it is. But I think you guys took over.
So there's a lad who's not here today, Rob Rowley. So Rob came in specifically for certain tasks, and one of his jobs was to address the way the animals were costumed, and so he worked very closely with Paul. Paul had a massive amount of input, but it was a crossover between special effects and costume and Rob. Because obviously, you know, at the time of kind of filming, we didn't know what those creatures were going to be. And I know that we were sent through an outline of possibly what they were, what type of animal, and then you kind of work. We had the monkeys, so and you haven't seen anything that they're the costume in just yet, so that comes in film too. But all those other extra, you know, the professors and so on, we knew there was going to be a goat. We knew there was going to be a broad bill, so you know we could start to assimilate possibly what it was, but it wasn't. That was kind of almost like a post-production element to the film that I certainly wasn't involved with, but Rob stayed on with Paul, working remotely in order to address, you know, those characters.
Thank you.
I really wish we saw the giraffe. All right, last question.
Hello. In terms of like concept visual development, where exactly is everybody looking for references to then like take inspiration from?
I feel like that's really everything everywhere all at once. For lack of a better reference, it's everything. When I tell you, if you see Paul's initial kind of like his board, the board that he did for us, or the presentation that he did, when I tell you it encompasses everything, it was like Art Nouveau. It had like, art sketch, it had architecture in it, even for costume. It had detailed, like up close microscopic things of nature. It had oil paintings in it. It had high fashion references. It had fashion from the past. And then it had historical references in there. There was jewelry references in there. So there's a bunch of different things, but we really do pull from across the gamut. You kind of fan out and then you hone in once you get specific to the ideas. I'd say it's similar to like oil painting. It's like general to specific. So you go general, you do a broad general pass, you start narrowing in, and then you do have things that come up, like the Fibonacci spiral. That thing became something that became a latching point, and then it really spiraled, for lack of a better word, it spiraled into the actual designs. It influenced everything, even down to what we were talking about, the bubble dress. You saw my illustration of the bubble dress was very symmetrical. Once it got over there with London, with Darrell and everybody, and you see how it changed, that spiral played such a huge part because then it became asymmetrical and all the structural things are kind of coming from like her hip and like expanding around her body. And that's just one example of it. But once that became there, then that took it off. So it's like the reference was very broad and then it got specific as it went along.
Yeah, and I should also add to that, we're working very closely with the makers. So they're, whilst we're starting up in production, they're starting to sample stuff. So that's a great piece of information for us as artists to go and visit them. And this is a general piece of advice to anybody. I'd say, if you get an opportunity to be in a costume department, if you get your foot in the door, and you're there, and just as a trainee, whatever it is, go and see all those artisans. Just make yourself a nuisance, just to learn what they do, because it's real education and knowledge for what we do. And they love to share that knowledge. And I think it's really, really critical to, for us as concept artists to realize that we're not standalone figures. We rely on information. Whether that's coming from the designer, or whether it's coming from a maker, or whether it's coming from a mood board. Yes, we do imagine stuff out the top of our heads, but having that background of information is such a boon. I just want to bring in Barry because, I just want to ask Barry myself in terms of because he was on really, really early and didn't really do, he only, dealt with kind of alphabet, but it'd be interesting to see what your is kind of reference to what Paul was giving you at that particular point in time.
Well, I'm pretty sure we all have the same kind of reference when it came to alphabet and whatnot. I think for me, this was my first project. So it was a bit overwhelming to start because I'm a huge fan of Wicked. I've always been. I've seen it in Broadway at least 3 times. But to not get overwhelmed, Paul was such a humble and gracious person that he kind of just led us into the right direction, or just many different directions, depending on what he wanted to see. And so, like everyone said, he had a reference folder of just everything you needed to pull from. So it was just ideas and iterations from there. But it's just part of what we do is just, make as many iterations as possible so he can see what he likes, what he doesn't like, and so we can navigate a different direction. Seeing and I worked on like the very, very beginning, but seeing where it morphed and evolved to was just simply amazing to see. Like, it's just...
Yeah, when you see Barry, the start that Barry made and where Alphabet ended up is remarkable. Yeah, it's such a massive transition.
Absolutely, and as far as like piggybacking on what you're saying, as far as like talking to costumers and who actually make these things, talking to Paul, I didn't know half of these folds until I talked to Paul. And so I've learned so much just understanding what, just what seams and folds and all these things and what they mean and where they go. And so, getting to talk to someone who actually makes these costumes is very important from what I can say.
Well, I think that's a perfect note to end things on. Much like Wicked itself, we ended up being a little bit longer than anticipated. And it also occurred to me, I don't think I ever introduced myself at the start. Well, my name's Aiden Kelly, in case anyone's curious. I'm a news editor at Collider.com. Don't clap for that. Clap for Darrell Warner, Boutté Jr., and our incredible panel of concept artists. Thank you all so much for coming, and have a great rest of LightBox.